Are we recording yet? Okay.
Recording in progress.
All right. Hello. Welcome everyone to our City Council study session for September 11th, 2023. We have several topics on our agenda today, one of which is carried over from last week. So thank you for those of you that attended last week and are now here today with us again in person. So I will turn it over to our City Administrator, Allison Zelms, to introduce the first topic.
Thank you, Council President, Council members, Mayor Norton, members of the public. We have back with us today Taryn Edens. She will be kicking off a conversation about housing and neighborhood services, an update on her division and some efforts that they've been undertaking to look at opportunities for single family home ownership as well. So with that, I would turn it over. I hope that's accurate.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
accurate. Thank you. Good afternoon, council members, council president, mayor. My name is Taryn Edens, manager of housing and neighborhood services, which is a division within community development. Today, really, my plan is to provide you an overview of the services within our division, a little context on what projects have been underway, a roadmap of where our division has been, and a snapshot of kind of where we're looking for the future, what programs we're working on. Really, there's no council action requested before you today. This is intended to be primarily informational and looking for feedback, comments, and questions along the way. Just to give you a quick preview of who are we. So as a reminder, our division sits under community development. It includes three dedicated rental housing inspectors, one of which, a fourth, is a short-term rental inspector who also aids in code enforcement. We have a full-time zoning liaison whose full-time role is code enforcement. But we've got 2.5 other specialized roles who support. One supports urban design and heritage preservation. The other supports economic development, grant administration, housing programs. And then we also have an office assistant who helps administer some of our housing programs as well. So just giving you an idea of the scope of our work. What things have we been working on? So current happenings in our division right now. Our team is engaged in state legislation and direction to support housing. So aside from the standard operations of maintaining safe and quality housing stock, through rental inspections and code enforcement, as well as administering grants, completing required state reporting, among others, our team has been engaged in a few other activities. As many of you are aware, the state legislation has been monumental this year, and we've been actively engaged with the League of Minnesota Cities, providing Rochester's experience as we review all these potential opportunities. Per CAA brought forward this year, recommendations on incentives to create owner-occupied housing is underway with the final draft and development and review. You'll hear a bit about that at the end of the presentation. Our team has been working on recommendations for the Economic Vitality Fund, which is part of the sales tax extension many of you are familiar with. We've really been working on research for this project since 2022 in hopes of providing really talking points, communication strategies, data points for looking to pass this. And now that we're getting near the end, we've been making recommendations for the past year on how we might fund this opportunity. So you'll hear more about this at the end of the year, end of the presentation as well, excuse me. Our team also supports long-term and short-term needs of persons experiencing homelessness, as you are aware of from last week. This is both taking an active role in attending the shelter work group meetings so that we may contribute towards discussions for both short-term and long-term solutions. Additionally, our team does play a role in enforcement of encampments when they occur on private land, and we collaborate with partner agencies on enforcement when needed. So we interact in a few different ways. This division does still aim to move towards intentional proactive enforcement. That includes us adopting a vacant building registry code this past year and working towards tools and technologies to be able to implement this program in 2024. So in the meantime, we have one inspector who's been dedicated to monitoring properties that will be eligible for this list. Our team did implement a brand new housing code this past year, which included launching the rental property incentive system that I'll mention later. Essentially, this allows us to score inspections when we're conducting rental inspections to result in a 1-year, 2-year, a 3-year, or 4-year inspection cycle, where traditionally all rentals were inspected every 2 years. So it's really a way for us to incentivize compliance. With that comes a lot of technology solutions to allow us to score inspections in the field without bias. So we're currently managing those changes and monitoring scoring outcomes really to make sure we achieve a good baseline and ensure the system is working the way we intended it to. Due to some of the happenings that occurred the past 12 months, our team is also taking a more proactive approach to collaborate around distressed properties to avoid worst case scenarios like a condemnation. Our team is part of 4 formal groups to discuss 2 specific properties. 2 of those meetings also just collaborate on distressed properties altogether. So that too is an ongoing project, really to try to find a better formalized group to effectively collaborate as needed versus our current branch off meetings on this. So those are just a few things we're working on in addition to our standard operations. Where we've been, just as a reminder, community development was established around 2018-19, and our division was established in 2020. So since that time, in 2020, we have reestablished a recurring meeting with the Rochester Multi-Housing Association, which is a formal group of property managers in the community, and they were engaged with updating the housing code in 2020. In 2020 was also a critical year for members of the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing. I also have the privilege of sitting on that leadership council, and this group made major investments in 2021, including an investment from the city to meet the 5 priorities outlined from the 2020 Housing Needs Assessment. Around that time, we also launched a lead remediation grant program with some state funding that's you'll hear more about in a bit. Really, we've launched 3 pilot programs since 2022 in an effort to support our housing needs with that additional grant opportunity from the state included. This year, we launched another pilot program with your approval and held which was the ADU pilot program. And we have held our first public safety training, which is a requirement for anyone with a rental certificate. It was our first in-person training since 2018. So we've accomplished a lot, we've come far, and we're continuing to experience growth. So just generally speaking, you'll see that the rental units in Rochester, as you're well aware, have increased exponentially. Our estimate for 2023 is about 27,000. Note that that includes units in the queue that have been planned for development. I've come to understand about 500 rental units open their door this summer. So eventually that comes to my team to inspect them for regular property maintenance. As you also know, we're anticipating more rental units in 2024. If I was just looking at the applications for tax credits alone, that would be 448 units if all were to be funded with state funding. So with that in mind, we have about, once again, 3-4 rental inspectors who are responsible for ensuring the quality of those properties. So as we manage growth, we continue to think about ways that we can improve our processes. So incentivizing compliance is the best way to do that through the property incentive system. We're able to gather data that way as well, with a better idea of properties that regularly perform well. We've seen this work in other communities like St. Paul and find that most properties over time become more compliant and result in a 3 or 4 year inspection cycle. It allows us to automate inspection reports. So as I mentioned, some of the tools with this is implementing new technology that we're testing now. So inspectors have to complete their paperwork after each inspection. We expect to find corrections, though we don't, I can assure you there are some that have none. So when we do that, we are now testing a tool to be able to create the letter in the field, which ideally will maximize our time for inspections and less time for paperwork. And then lastly, growing customer services. We're looking to find ways to implement other technologies for self-service opportunities for customers, whether that's making all forms available online or finding other ways to complete administrative tasks digitally. That aside, our administrative staff have been cross-trained to maximize our customer response time, and we've seen vast improvements on that alone due to that change. So that's one aspect of our division. As I mentioned, the other relates to affordable housing programs, resources, policies, and the like. So these are a few that you've probably seen before. Some have been around for a while, some of them are new. The Community Development Block Grant, you'll hear a lot about this fall, so I'd like to give you a little preview that's a federal grant that we get every year. We are direct grantee of those funds. And the biggest investment we've made those funds is the single family rehabilitation loan program, which is essentially a deferred loan program which the city partners with Olmsted County Housing Department to carry out in conjunction with their own single-family rehab program. It offers deferred loans to qualifying homeowners of up to $25,000 and has been in place since 1983, and we've currently served about 490 properties with this program. The rental rehab loan pilot program was just launched in 2022, also using CDBG funds. And a formal proposed policy will be coming to council as this pilot was successfully completed. We renovated a fourplex, which essentially ensured, our goal was to make sure the project that was chosen preserves naturally occurring affordable housing. So they agree basically to stabilizing rents for a period of time, for 10 years specifically. As you're well aware, tax increment financing is always a tool that we've used and is a way for us to contribute towards affordable housing. We've supported just under 2,500 units with TIF, 80 of those for sale, and 273 rental townhomes, the rest affordable multifamily units. I mentioned that we're a recipient of a state grant, and I'll cover that more in the next slide. The council also approved a fee reimbursement pilot program in 2022. So I'll touch more about that specifically as I have some updates to share. The ADU pilot program was most recently approved by council. It is intended to incentivize the development of ADUs in our community. The program proposes to use federal CDBG funding to offer up to $20,000 in reimbursements of city fees and indirect costs of meeting city code requirements. This program will be able to fund at least the 3 ADUs, the creation of. So far, we haven't had any formal applications. We have seen 3 building permits that have expressed interest in applying for our program. We wouldn't reimburse it till the ADU is built, and we've gotten at least 20 inquiries on our program. The 4D program is a partnership between the city and the county to allow owners of rentals with 4 or more units to apply for a property tax discount once a year. The discount remains in place for 10 years, so long as the property continues to offer affordable rents. Those rents are determined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Many of you know fair market rents. Lastly, the city is actively reviewing our own parcels for disposition with the intent of making residential parcels available for housing development. Council did receive an update on this back in March, and you will be informed of any action as we proceed with going through that list. So with that, I did want to dive into 2 specific ones that I have updates on. One was the lead hazard reduction grant. This is just good to share with your constituents as you're able to. We have this grant through June of 2024. We received approximately $100,000 to allocate funds. We compare this often with our rehab grants, and it's eligible to rental or owner occupied properties. So here's a list of some of the ways that this is used. And it is a grant, not a deferred loan, so it's a great benefit in that way to the recipients. So far, we've completed 2 homes, one of them being an owner-occupied single-family, and one being a rental property that was a single-family rental. With that, we have 21 pending enrollments. We have a lot underway currently. The fee reimbursement program, we have some updates there. Just a reminder, the council approved to fund this program using $500,000 of holistic stability funding or ARPA funds for the program. We then extended the program that was approved to be extended through 2023.
So here's a list of some of the ways that
maximum
this is
reimbursement
used.
is
$20,000
of development fees per unit. So just a reminder, this is for owner-occupied units.
Completed 2 homes, one of them being an owner-occupied single-family growth,
of
and one
owner-occupied
being
units.
a rental property.
Really, what you'll see is
with
we
that, we have
reimbursed 12 homes. So 12 homes have been
created,
created, and generally, we're seeing that benefit come back to the owner as down payment assistance.
The fee reimbursement
and we
program,
have
we have
21
some
homes
updates
in the
there.
queue
Just a reminder,
that
the
have been
council
conditionally
approved to fund
approved for
this program
reimbursement.
using $500,000 of holistic stability
In short,
funding.
we
or
also
ARPA
know of,
funds
I
for
would
the
say,
program.
2 more
We
who
then
are coming our
extended
way,
the program,
and
or
we
that
will
was
be
approved to be
then
extended through
allocating all of the funds.
2023.
So as a reminder,
Maximum
again, the
reimbursement
council also approved
is
to reserve
$20,000 of development fees per unit.
of this
So just a reminder,
$500
this is for
allocation
owner-occupied units
for
only, and it's an
for
attempt
the
to
Mayowood 2
incentivize
development
growth
to pay for
of
fees
owner-occupied
anticipated
units.
for that, to support that.
Really what you'll see is
deeply affordable
we
senior
reimbursed 12
housing
homes, so
project,
12 homes
right?
have been
So
created, and
with
generally
that, we'll
we're seeing that
currently
benefit come
allocate
back
the rest
to
of
the
our
owner
funds
as
to the
down
fee
payment
reimbursement
assistance. And we have 21 homes in the
What we're
queue
hearing is there's
that
definitely
have been
still a
conditionally
demand
approved
for this program. We
reimbursement.
continue to get inquiries. We've seen this as a successful program as
In
state
short, we also
legislation
know
has
of,
actually
I would say, two
mirrored,
more who are coming our way.
program
and we will
guidelines to create a
be
similar
then
program for
allocating all
Greater
of the funds.
Minnesota.
So as a reminder,
we are excited about
we
this
ended-
program and are
the
thinking
council
about
also
ways that we can
approved
see
to reserve
council approval to
$272,000
into the
of this
future.
$500 allocation for
Roles and
the
partnerships,
Mayowood
really quick,
2
I'd just like to
developments
remind
pay
you all
for
that our
fees
team works pretty
anticipated for
closely
that
with
to
a number
support
of
that,
partners in developing programs and
deeply
policies.
affordable senior housing project.
Whether that's with
right?
internally,
So with
with
that,
Public Works,
we have currently
amongst our
allocated
own
the rest
other
of our funds
divisions,
for
the
the
community
fee reimbursement
development.
program.
And this just serves as a reminder that
What
really
we're
one
hearing
component
is
of
there's
serving our
definitely
housing needs
still
in
a
our
demand for this
community, and we
program. We
collaborate with
continue to
many
get
others on
inquiries.
solutions.
We've seen this as a successful program as state
Where are we
legislation has
headed?
actually mirrored our program guidelines to create a similar
So
program
as
for
we look
Greater
forward, I
Minnesota.
mentioned we are looking
we're
to
excited about
secure
this
funding
program and
sources to
thinking about
continue
ways
the
that
fee
we can see
reimbursement
council
program
approval
into
to
the future.
continue it into the future.
This does enable us to reimburse city fees for the creation of modest owner
Roles and
occupied homes.
partnerships, really quick, I'd just like to remind you all that our team works
The city
pretty
did
closely with
invest
a number of partners in
$150,000
developing
of
programs and
CDBG
policies.
funds in First Homes,
Whether that's
which is
with
our local
internally
community
with
land
Public
trust,
Works,
which is another way we
amongst
can
our own
positively
other
impact
divisions in
affordable
community
home
development.
ownership in our community.
And this just serves as a reminder that
In
we're really one
2022,
component of
First Homes
serving our
invested
housing
in
needs in our
15
community, and
community
we
land trust
collaborate with
homes
many others on
and are currently
solutions.
at 8 homes in 2023. This can happen through
Where are we
acquisition
headed?
and rehab, or they're building new homes as well. It's a
So
common
as
way
we
for
look forward,
communities
I
to create
mentioned we are
affordable
looking to secure
owner-occupied
funding
units in
sources to
perpetuity.
continue the fee reimbursement program into the
Low-income
future.
housing tax credits are a
This
tool by
does
the
enable
state to
us to
contribute
reimburse
to
city
affordable
fees for the creation
multifamily
of modest
development.
owner-occupied homes.
I think many of you know we received 6 applications
The city did
this
invest
year, which is really monumental
$150,000
for
of
our community.
CDBG
It
funds
shows,
in First Homes,
I would say, a desire
which
to
is
develop
our
here and
local
also
community
the
land
need,
trust, which is
frankly.
another way we can positively impact
Over $1 million
affordable
of
homeownership in our
multi-year
community.
increments have been awarded to Rochester
In
in the
2022,
past 3
First
years
Homes
alone.
invested in
So this continues
15
to be a
community
tool,
land trust homes,
and we do
and are currently at
we did
8
have more
homes in
opportunities this year
2023.
to
This can happen
communicate
through
with Minnesota
acquisition, and
Housing
we
on our
have
6
or they're building
applications
new
than we
homes
have in
as
the
well.
past.
It's a common way for communities to
You're
create
all aware of the
affordable
UDC, and I'd
owner-occupied
say
units in
from our
perpetuity.
perspective and how this relates to housing,
Low-income housing
zoning
tax credits
flexibilities
are a
and
tool by
creating
the
the
state to
Unified
contribute
Development
to
Code
affordable
really does create an
multifamily
opportunity
development.
for incremental
I think
density
many of you know we
and
received
other
6
ways to remove
applications
barriers to
this
develop
year, which is
housing. So
really
what we're seeing
monumental for
really,
our community and
we've
shows,
seen an increase in
I
middle
would say,
density
desire to
proposals come
develop here and
forward.
also the
And like I
need,
mentioned, we're
frankly.
seeing a couple more
Over $1
redevelopment
million
meetings for
of
accessory dwelling
multi-year
units.
increments have been
And those are
awarded to
some ways we're
Rochester
seeing
in
incremental
the
changes
past
that
3 years
affecting
alone.
housing.
So this continues to be a tool, and we do.
I'll skip over
we
TIF,
did
as that's
have more
always a tool that we're
opportunities this
thinking
year to
about how we can
communicate
use
with
it
Minnesota
in
Housing on
serving
our
both
6
renter and owner
applications than we
occupied
have in the
housing.
past.
A little highlight I'd like to mention,
You're
as the
all
city
aware
does
of
sit
the
on the
UDC, and
Coalition
I'd
for
say
Rochester
from our
Housing, is
perspective
that
and how
group
this
is
relates to
developing a
housing,
revolving
zoning
loan fund,
flexibilities, and
which is
creating
looking
the
to
Unified
leverage our
Development
fee
Code really does
reimbursement
create an
program
opportunity for incremental
to
density
really create a lower
and
no
other ways to
interest
remove
construction
barriers to
loan for the
develop
creation
housing.
of
So what we're
owner-occupied
seeing really,
housing. So it's another way really
we've
we're
seen an
hoping to
increase in middle density
incentivize the creation
proposals
of
come
owner-occupied
forward.
housing.
And like I mentioned, we're seeing a couple more pre-development meetings for accessory dwelling units. And those are some ways
I've
we're seeing
mentioned parcel
incremental changes in
disposition
that affecting housing.
already. I'll be talking about the creation of
I'll skip
owner-occupied
over
incentives
TIF
for the
as that's
CIA
always a tool
request
that we're thinking
momentarily.
about how we can
And I'll
use
also be
it
talking
in serving
about
both
the
renter and
economic
owner-occupied
vitality
housing.
fund. So those are just a few things.
A little
that
highlight
we're
I'd like
looking
to
forward
mention, as the city
And I would
does
say
sit on
generally
the
it's always
Coalition for
worth
Rochester
noting
Area
that our
Housing is that
capital
group is
improvement
developing a
projects is
revolving
another
loan fund,
process and way for the
which is
council
looking to leverage
to guide
our fee
investments that really have an
reimbursement
effect on
program
housing.
to really create a lower
So
no
with that,
interest
as many of you
construction
are
loan for the
familiar,
creation of
earlier this
owner-occupied
year,
housing.
council
So it's
initiated
another way
action was
really we're hoping
executed to
to
direct
incentivize the
staff to
creation
come
of
up with a
owner-occupied
package
housing.
of incentives for the creation of owner-occupied housing. This project is still underway.
I've
and is
mentioned
being
parcel
considered
disposition
strategically to align with
already.
the
I'll be
opportunities
talking about
that
the
could be
creation of
presented with the
owner-occupied
economic
incentives
vitality
for the
funding.
CIA request momentarily.
What we found
and
is
I'll
that
also be
it's
talking
been a very
about the
intensive
economic
process. So
vitality
this
fund.
gives you
So those
some
are just a
guidance
few
to what
things
we've done so
that we're
far and where
looking
it's
forward
going,
to.
as well
And I would
as
say generally it's
a
always
list
worth
of the
noting
different
that our
considerations that you will be
capital
seeing.
improvement projects is another
Generally,
process and way for the council
what you'll
to
find
guide
is a lot of
investments
the
that really have an
recommendations
effect
are
on housing.
policy in nature that we do talk about flexibilities or
So with
opportunities
that,
with
as
our
many of you
existing
are
financial
familiar,
tools.
earlier Earlier
what we
this
could
year,
consider,
council initiated action
as
was
well as
executed to
housing
direct
programs. And like
staff
I
to come up
mentioned,
with a
thinking about
package
how we can
of
leverage potential
incentives
opportunities
for the
with
creation of
economic
owner-occupied
vitality
housing.
for that.
This project is still
We
underway.
know that this is a
and is
big
being
need.
considered strategically
Specifically,
to align
this
with
question
the
was asked of how many
opportunities that
owner-occupied
could be presented with the
building permits have
economic
been filed in
vitality funding.
2023.
What we found
counted
is
about
that it's been a very intensive process. So this
122.
gives you
So
some
that's
guidance to what
considering,
we've done so far and where it's going,
townhomes
as well as a
well.
list of the different considerations that you will be
Increase in
seeing.
that, and it's excluding
Generally,
a handful of
what you'll
single-family
find is
dwellings
a
that
lot of
were
the
built to rent.
recommendations are
So
policy in
122 is our
nature that
best
we do
guess
talk
this
about
year.
flexibilities
So we
or
know there,
opportunities
we
with
know
our
there is
existing
quite a
financial
need,
tools,
I would say.
what we could consider.
What have we done
as well
so
as
far?
housing programs,
Conducted
and
quite a
like I
bit of
mentioned,
research on what
thinking
other
about how we can
communities
leverage
do,
potential
recommendations that were
opportunities with
brought forward
economic vitality
internally
for
and
that.
externally. We've had
We know that this is
internal
a big
meetings,
need.
multiple internal meetings with
Specifically,
our own
this
departments.
question was
as
asked
well
of how
as
many
met with,
owner-occupied
Homestead
building
County, the
permits have
Coalition
been
for
filed in
Rochester Area Housing,
2023.
on how we can
We
leverage
counted
our different
about
programs and what our needs are.
122.
We've
So
conducted
that's
some supportive
considering
data analysis for
townhomes
recommendations.
as well. We saw
What does
an
that mean?
increase
It
in
means
that,
taking a
and
look
it's
at our
excluding
fee
a
structures
handful
and
of
schedules if we are going to consider
single-family dwellings that
changing
were
those or
built to
making
rent.
a recommendation
122 is our
for
best
council
guess
to do
this
that.
year.
So we've ran
So we know
scenarios for
we know there
development.
is quite a need.
We've
I
also
would say.
ran data
What
on
have
the
we
number of
done so
single-family
far?
rentals
We've conducted
and
quite a
short-term
bit of
rentals that
research
we
on what
have
other
based on the
communities
request
do,
policy there as
recommendations that
well.
were brought forward
So data analysis
internally
has been
and
complete.
externally.
We're conducting our
We've
final
had
report
internal
now.
meetings,
We'll be
multiple
meeting
internal
internally
meetings with our own
and getting
departments,
approval for
as
that, and
well
we'll come
as
back to
met with
council.
Olmsted County, the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing.
The
on how we
Economic
can leverage our
Vitality
different
Fund,
programs and what
ideally,
our
this is
needs are.
something you're all relatively
We've
familiar as it
conducted
relates to
some
the sales
supportive
tax
data
extension
analysis for
specifically.
recommendations.
As
What
you
does
know,
that mean?
economic
It means
development
taking a
is a
look at our
priority in
fee
Rochester and a
structures and
component
schedules
of
if we are
the
going to
council's
consider
adopted
changing
strategic
those or
priorities.
making a
It certainly
recommendation
relates to
for
affordable
council to
living.
do that. So we've ran scenarios for developments. We've also ran data on the number of single-family rentals and short-term rentals that we have based on a request review policy there as well. So data analysis has been complete. We're conducting our final report now. We'll be meeting internally and getting approval for that, and we'll come back to council. The Economic Vitality Fund, ideally this is something you're all relatively familiar as it relates to the sales tax extension specifically. As you know, economic development is a priority in Rochester and a component of the council's adopted strategic priorities. It certainly relates to affordable living, economic vibrancy, and growth management. Both housing and workforce development are examples of components to economic development strategies, really to ensure both our labor and workforce needs are met, as well as ensuring that there are housing options and access for all. And we really see those going hand in hand. So generally, what's going to be funded or what are we proposing with this fund? We're looking at buckets of funding which aim to fund multiple programs which support the creation of housing. As you all very well know, that we face supply issues, as well as how can we leverage housing preservation, meaning our best asset, existing housing stock, ensuring existing housing stays livable, accessible, and affordable. As you're likely also aware, the funding is intended to invest in workforce and business development needs, which include both examples of supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs, among others. So with that, I shall pause for questions or comments.
Okay, thank you so much for that excellent presentation. Mayor Norton, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to make you repeat something that you said, and so if I just completely missed out on it, my apologies, but I had a question on one of the pilot programs, the rental rehab loan pilot program. So I'm trying to figure out what is the incentive that they get with us that they don't get just taking out a loan? What's the incentive to use that program as opposed to just a bank?
We don't
Why don't
charge
you know
interest.
exactly?
Okay, so it's an
I would say
interest-free
that's-
loan, but
I
it's
just didn't want
not
to be confident and say
loan that
exactly, but
gets-
that's the exact number to date.
excused if they keep
So I'm
the
done.
rents
Question
down
for
for an
you.
X
Ms.
period of
Nelms,
time, or they just. it's
Back
just
when
the
we
interest
did
free
our
that they get
CIA
for
on
that.
With
this,
this pilot
we were
program,
expecting
we
to
did
have
propose
people
a
come back to us
forgivable
in
loan, so
June,
that's gonna
maybe
be a policy
July,
consideration
on
brought to you,
incentives for
to
builders
consider.
to
And
build
that's what we found in other
owner-occupied
communities
single-family
that often they
dwellings.
have to be forgivable,
And really
right?
today, all I've heard is
Okay, that was my
demand
question. Thank you.
issues, down payment. I've not heard where we're going to
Councilmember
help
Palmer.
supply. And I had not heard, we're already
So your
2/3
best
of the
guess
year
is
through at
122
122
homes, single
houses.
family.
Maxfield study says we need
Owner-occupied.
450
Owner-occupied.
houses. it
Why
doesn't
don't you
seem
know
like
exactly?
anybody but the city council
would say
cares that
that's-
we're not at four
I
hundred
just
and
didn't want
fifty
to be
houses.
confident and say exactly,
So
but that's the exact
why don't
number
we have
today.
a plan
Okay.
today that says this
Done,
is the,
question
this
for
is
you.
our
Ms.
plan to
Helms,
get us to four hundred and fifty
But back
houses?
when we did our
Where did that
CIA on
CIA
this,
fail?
we were expecting to
I
have
heard
people
Ms.
come back to
Eden
us in
saying
June,
they're,
maybe
um,
July.
at the place where they're
On
drafting the
incentives
final
for
report that
builders
would
to
bring you
build
the policy
owner-occupied
considerations
single-family
necessary in
dwellings.
order for the city
And
council
really
to
today, all I've
understand
heard
and then
is
determine whether or
demand
not the fee
issue down
reductions,
payment. I've
et
not
cetera,
heard
are
where we're going
something
to help
that
supply.
are
I had
a
not
policy
heard,
that you want to make.
we're already
But
2/3 of
maybe
the
Ms.
year
Edens
through at
could clarify.
122 houses.
Well, but I mean,
Maxfield
And there
study says
wasn't
we
a
need
timeframe
450
placed on that
houses.
CIA at
It
the
doesn't
final
seem like
approval, if I
anybody
recall.
but the city council
well, we
cares that
brought
we're
it to
not
you
at
in April, we
450
all voted
houses.
for it, and then I said
So
May, and they said
why
probably
don't we
June,
have a
maybe
plan
July.
today that says
Now we're in
this is the-
September.
This is our plan to
Um,
get us to 450 houses.
You know,
Where did that
I
CIA
don't want to
fail?
sound disappointed that
I
I
heard
am,
Ms.
that we
Eden
don't
saying
have
that
something
they're,
today that says,
at the
if
place
you're
where
a
they're
builder
drafting the
or
final
an
report that
investor
would
and you
bring
want
you
to
the
come to
policy
Rochester, these are
considerations
the things we're
necessary
going
in
to
order
do to
for the
help
city
you.
council to understand and then
single-family
determine whether or
owner-occupied
not
homes.
the fee
Maybe we
reductions,
could talk
et
through
cetera,
all
are
of the
something
things that
that
are,
are,
listed on the
are
slide that will
a
be coming to
policy that
you.
you want to make.
Okay,
Let's
But
be
maybe
clear
Ms.
about,
Edens
but
could
also
clarify.
have financial implications for
but
the
I mean,
city.
And there
what
wasn't a
date would this be
timeframe
coming to
placed
us?
on that
I
CIA
can't
at
give
the
you a
final
date.
approval, if I recall.
Well, we brought it to you in April. We all voted for it, and then I said May, and they said
I would
probably
ask the
June,
staff to
maybe
be able to tell
July.
us when
Now we're
they
in
believe that it will
September.
be able to come to us. We
Um,
would have brought this to you last week had we
You know,
not had
I don't want
additional
to sound
conversation
disappointed
on the
that I
other
am, that we
on the
don't have
other
something
topic
today
that
that
was on the
says,
agenda.
if you're a builder or an investor and you want to come to Rochester,
Timeline?
this is the things we're going to do to help you with
I
single-family
don't currently.
owner-occupied homes.
I don't have a date that I
Maybe
can
we could
commit
talk
to.
through all of the things that
currently. I
are
would
listed
say
on this slide
the-
that will be coming to
Yes,
you.
as noted here, the list
Okay.
Which we
includes
care
policy
about, but
also
considerations
have
that will
financial
specifically
implications for the
support
city.
Supply
And what
versus
date would
the
this be coming
demand
to
as
us?
alluded to.
I can't give you a date.
I would say it's a priority in addition to maintaining operations and making sure we provide a thorough.
I would ask the
extensive
staff to be
report.
able to tell us when
As I
they
mentioned,
believe
to
that it
some
will be
degree,
able to
it's
come
been
to us. We
strategic
would have
in
brought this
planning
to
for
you
where we
last
can
week
fund a
had we
lot of
not
these
had
programs as well.
additional
So
conversation on
I
the
don't have
other
a committed
on the
date
other
to
topic
provide you
that was
except
on
for
the
sharing that is a
agenda.
priority.
I think it's pretty
Any
clear from
sense of
this
a timeline,
presentation that you
Ms.
and
Edens?
your team are already carrying
I
pretty
don't
heavy loads,
currently.
and I know there's
I don't have a
an
date that I
additional
can
building
commit to
inspector to bring back
currently.
online.
I would say
which hopefully will
the,
help support
yes,
this
as
very
noted here,
busy
the
load
list
that your team
includes
has.
policy considerations that will
lot of really great
specifically
work
support
going on
supply
already, so I
versus
know
the
part of
demand
it
that's
was
alluded
understanding how
to.
some of what we've invested
I would say
in
it's a priority
recently
in
is
addition
working
to
and where we
maintaining
make
operations and making sure
recommendations
we
to
provide a
extend that,
thorough,
as well
extensive
as
report.
what other policy
As I
considerations.
mentioned,
So I
to some
appreciate
degree,
the
it's been
thoughtfulness
strategic in
and the
planning
work
for
with
where
the
we can
partners
fund
that's
a lot
going
of
into
these
this to
programs as
actually
well. So
get us to a place
I
where
don't
we
have
can
a committed date
evaluate
to
and make
provide
some
you except for sharing that
decisions
it's a
instead of,
priority.
you know, coming
I think
back
it's
with
pretty
something
clear
that's
from this
just
presentation
partially
that
done that will take a
you
huge
and
amount
your
more work to
team
get
are
us to
already
move anywhere.
carrying
So
pretty heavy loads, and I
I
know
know it's
there's
not an
an
ideal
additional
timeline, but
building
I
inspector
appreciate
to
that
bring back
hopefully we'll
online,
come back and be
which
able to make
hopefully will
some
help
decisions
support
to
this
bring us
very
forward.
busy load that your
Councilmember
team
Wall?
has. There's a lot of really
Thank
great
you.
work
I'd like to
going on
expand
already,
on
so I know
Mr. Palmer's
part of it
question.
was
My interest
understanding
is
how
in the
some of what
Maxfield
we've
study
invested in
and how
recently
we are
is
doing
working
not
and,
just on
and where we
single-family
might make
homes,
recommendations
but
to
on
extend that, as
senior
well as what other
units
policy
and
considerations.
rentals
So I
as
appreciate the
well. Just
thoughtfulness
as a
and the work
whole,
with the
how are we
partners
doing?
that's going into this to actually get us
Anecdotally,
to
I
a
can
place where
respond
we
and
can
say as a whole
evaluate and
for
make
rental
some
units,
decisions
my
instead
observation
of,
is we're
you know,
meeting the
coming back
demand, we're
with
not
something that's
exceeding it.
just
That's
partially
what I'm
done that will
hearing
take a
from
huge amount more
rental
work to get
managers
us
and
to
their
move
current
anywhere.
vacancy
So
rates. Senior housing,
I
we're
know
still
it's not
falling
an
behind.
ideal timeline, but
I would
appreciate
say
that
with the
hopefully we'll come back
anticipated
and be able to
applications
make
we're
some
hearing, we could
decisions
meet,
to bring
you know,
us
this year's
forward.
demand.
Councilmember
I would
Wall?
say. So we are currently,
Thank you.
we're
I'd
not
like to
overproducing in
expand
those
on
areas.
Mr.
We're meeting
Palmer's
the
question.
demand,
My
which will
interest is
continue
in
to
the
grow
Maxfield
over the
study
years, but as we
and
know, we
how
are
we are
certainly
doing not
underproducing
just
the
on
owner-occupied
single-family
realm.
homes, but on
we
senior
simply don't have
units
developers
and
who
rentals as
want to
well.
come in
Just
and
as a
take what's
whole,
available
how
to
are we
move
doing?
forward faster so that we can have
Anecdotally, I
a
can
greater
respond and
supply
say as a
people,
whole for
come to
rental units,
Rochester,
my
including
observation
the
is
single-family
we're
homes.
meeting the demand, we're not exceeding
You
it.
mean
That's what I'm
altogether,
hearing from
owner occupied
rental managers
and
and
not
current
just
vacancy
owner
Probably
rates.
more the
Senior housing, we're
single-family
still falling
homes. We had a
behind.
discussion about that
I would say
concerning
with the
property,
anticipated
north
applications
of,
we're
Ran
hearing, we
Franz
could
Vine
meet,
on
this year's
55th,
demand, I would say. So we are
Our
currently,
developers just so
we're not
busy these days
overproducing
that
in those
they
areas.
are
We're meeting the
bypassing
demand,
or
which will
just-
continue to
we
grow
just don't have
over
enough
the years. But
developers.
as we know, we are certainly
I would say
underproducing
there's a
owner occupied
multitude of
land.
reasons of why we're seeing a slow
And
growth growth in owner occupied
simply
units. A
don't
lot
have
of it is
developers
related
who
around
want to come in
labor
and
costs,
take what's
material costs,
available
and
to move
general
forward
increased
faster
costs.
so
So
that we can
certainly
have a greater
thus the
supply
reason why
as
we're
people
thinking as a city,
come
what
to
can we do
Rochester,
to better
including the
incentivize them?
single-family
Since we
homes.
don't have control of these external
You
factors,
mean
what can we do to
altogether,
simplify the
owner-occupied?
process?
Yeah, I'm sorry,
I
just
haven't
what else?
Probably more
necessarily
the single-family
heard that
homes. We
feedback.
had a
Surely
discussion
maybe
about
others
that
have
concerning the
of,
property
what we're
north
experiencing
of
is
Rent Friends
exclusive to
Vine on
Rochester.
55th.
But it's, I would say
Developers just
generally
so
it's
busy
many
these
factors,
days
and
that
that's what
they
I've heard
are
from builders.
bypassing,
So what
or
can we
just,
do to
we
combat
just don't
that?
have enough developers.
Councilmember
I would
King?
say there's a multitude
Thank
of
you.
reasons of why we're seeing
Earlier
a
on, you
slow
talked about
growth in
the
our
rental
occupied
units and the
units.
growth,
A
but
lot of
also
it
the
is
inspection
related
and the
around
change towards the
labor costs,
1,
material
2,
costs, and
3, and
general
4 year
increased
kind of
costs. So certainly,
cycle.
thus the
I
reason why
think
we're thinking as a
right
city,
now
what
we're
can we do to
closer to
better
1 and 2 year
incentivize them
cycles,
since we
or
don't
can you give
have
me a feel
control
what
of
the
these
breakdown
external
is with that,
factors?
or how
What can
that's
we do
working?
to simplify the
Yeah,
process?
so
I
traditionally
haven't
a rental had to be
necessarily
inspected every
heard
2
that
years.
feedback. Surely maybe
We've
others
really started
have
enforcement of this
you
in
know, what
March
we're
for when we sort
experiencing
of had
is
the tools and
exclusive to
technology available
Rochester.
to do this. As a
But
reminder,
it's,
inspectors
I would
have
say generally
elected
it's
to
many
not know
factors,
the
and that's
scoring
what I've heard
details, so we
from
had to find a way
builders.
to
So
make sure
what
it was
can we do to
unbiased.
combat that?
Really
you.
what we're finding in the short term, which we have to remove, I would say expired rentals into that, we are finding a lot more resulting in 3 or 4 year in a small percentage in 1 year. So our goal is to measure this for 2 years and then create a baseline essentially, and how can we move towards 3 or 4 year. You know, anecdotally, we did reach out to St. Paul and they shared their 3 year and 4 years move from 80% to 90% over 10 years. And that's really what our goal is. So right now we are seeing, I'd say, more in the 3 year and 4 year that are eligible for this tool.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that, because I would have thought we were having a much more trouble getting people just to pass the first one. Does this have to do with the scoring being different, or is there just better compliance?
Could you elaborate a bit more in passing the first one? And
I fielded a fair number of complaints from rental property owners that say, I can't pass these inspections. They do it different each time. From when I looked at us trying to go to the 1, 2, 3, 4, especially with the growth, 9,000 new units over 7 years, we had to make changes. But the fact that they're moving towards 3 and 4 year means they're passing. And I'm trying to understand how that happened. Is that better compliance? Is that we've done better education? Have we laxed some of the standards?
Yeah, so I would say it's a combination of things. I would say in general, we do, we're looking for property maintenance, right? So we're expecting to find things when we're conducting an inspection. It shouldn't be new things. We're looking to see if something could be fixed or improved or isn't working, among other things, right? So to some degree, we expect to find things, and really it's intended to be a service for the manager to find corrections to avoid higher costs later on, right? So if you have findings, you'll still likely score well. So the scoring was really developed in an effort to consider, prioritization and severity of findings, right? If it has a high impact on health and safety, it's going to score higher versus what I would call general maintenance, like a dusty bathroom vent. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but it could be a fire hazard if lint builds up, right? So generally, we still will find corrections, but we're taking into account what's reasonable and not for still incentivizing compliance. But for us, it's very clear when folks invest in what we would call a pre-inspection. And really, this isn't an effort to try to encourage folks to make that time and investment so that we will interact with them less and they can save money and time on that front.
Okay, good. No, it's good to see that. As far as the reaction here, again, I'm trying to remember if Councilmember Palmer brings up the thing, but I do remember it different than what ended up being passed. We did have the thing about, and I have this thing stuck in my head that we're incentives for $240,000 units, but I don't think that's what passed the council. I think it was a merger towards back of this consolidation of what you guys were already working on. I'm still looking for trying to get some of that stuff back. As far as like, why can't we as the city and, kind of edict this? This is all private sector work. This isn't the city doing housing starts. This is all business people looking at the risks and the rewards of building homes, and it's just not there right now. Now, I think we are challenging the city and our policies. What can we do about that? But I want to kind of guard against taking our city resources and basically building market rate houses for people that should be paying their own market rate housing. So I want to make sure that the focus that we have on improving the housing stock is on that first-time home buyers and the entry-level home buyers. but also that idea of, those more at risk and trying to get started. So, again, I just remember it different. And when we have these things set up here, that this is what we set out to mean, I don't remember it that way if that's what we ended up doing. So I'm remembering it a little different.
All right, Councilmember Kirkpatrick.
Thank you. I don't remember what slide you were on, but you had mentioned something in the beginning about a list of properties, and there were 2 distressed properties on the list. Can you just kind of elaborate on what that means and how you're going to go about working on that?
Yes.
Understandably, you had to talk very quickly through this, and I
Yes.
think I missed part of this. Thank you.
Yes, so we have 2 collaborative groups that meet around, I would say, residential communities that also generally hold a license with Olmsted County. So in those efforts, we have a more concerted, proactive effort to meet quarterly or monthly. And these properties or communities, may or may not, they have a history, right, of nuisance violations, to say the least. So those groups meet regularly. We've seen improvements in them for one of them, at least, I would say, right, or changes in the other. So those are the 2 specific examples. Outside of that, our team meets with the Community Action Team division of the police on a monthly basis. We've since invited in fire as well. And that's an opportunity for us to all talk about what I would call distressed properties that we all interact with and share information, find ways to come to solutions favorably. So we want to take those models and expand upon it to identify the bigger communities that we know have a history of being distressed, to come up with really more deeper, multifaceted ways to encourage compliance aside from our efforts in code enforcement. That's really the vision, but it's modeled after what we're doing so far.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much. I understand better now. And then on the where we've been slide in the middle, number 3, I think this may have been what Mr. Palmer was asking about, but the Housing Coalition Strategic Plan, number 3, housing for those earning less than 50% area median income. I just do not see this happening at all. How much progress are we making on that? Is it still like a 3rd goal, or does it need to be bumped to the top? Is it just not anything we're going to see as reality due to labor and materials issues?
I'm just looking to see, there was a slide I didn't include on the full deck of slides to share if it came up. So let's see if I can present that to you now. These are estimates, but essentially metrics from the Coalition of Rochester Area Housing and measuring how we're meeting these goals as a community. So know that a lot of these are estimates based on projects that may or may not be awarded from Minnesota Housing, right? So really, we're seeing a lot of that housing being provided via rental multifamily homes. And if they were to be supported, we'd see 280 new units, 56 preserved for 20 years, 124 for 30 years. So we are seeing some progress on there, but that's making assumptions, right? So if that doesn't happen, certainly we've got to consider other ways. So we're seeing it, contingency, considering.
That really, can I just add to that comment, because it just really highlights the need for government support for this particular AMI area, whether it's through state level support or for our local sales tax extension, bringing in some additional dollars to support housing. So I think it's just a really very clear highlight of the need for us to intervene in a really supportive way. So go ahead.
Yeah, that to me is really critical when I look at the numbers of what we've been able to do. I believe in an earlier discussion, maybe last year, we had talked about, perhaps 30% of our population being at 50% AMI or below. And the numbers that we're able to achieve just are barely making a dent. So anything we can do to incentivize that, I really appreciate. I have 2 more questions. You mentioned something about the 1-year inspections, and then Mr. Keene also brought that up. Is there a housing age or area that this is happening more, that you're seeing that you have to drop back to a 1-year inspection?
Not necessarily. I'd say now we have an opportunity to measure that to see if it's correlated with an age or geography or location. Anecdotally, you'll hear different things from my inspectors, I would say. So really, we should depend on the data to determine that. So not yet at this time. Is what
Awesome.
I'd share, but I would
Okay.
share with those one-year inspections, generally, we're trying to think of that as an avenue to connect to resources too. So think about our rental rehab program and the lead grant remediation, where we are able to refer folks to those programs because we're in the building. So we are trying to think about cross-sector opportunities with that as well.
Sure, awesome. I'll be eager to see that data when it comes out in the next couple of years, then thanks. And then my last question, maybe a little off topic, but not so much for me with what I'm seeing happening very close by. Is there any type of ordinance, or do we have anything in place for the amount of RPD responses to a particular rental residence when that rental license will be removed? What do we have that? Is that being enforced? Will it be enforced more with more inspectors coming on? How has that been going?
We do. Forgive me for not remembering the year because it was certainly before I was in this role, but our team did partner with PD to create a disorderly use code, which is reflected in the housing code. So essentially, if a rental property has a disorderly use occurrence, they are notified of that occurrence and basically provided a warning. You can get up to 3 a year before your license could be revoked. And I would say our team, and particularly PD, leads in this effort to really avoid getting to a second warning as much as possible. It's my understanding that we've only had to revoke one license since this has been done. And generally, PD will work with property management and ownership to find some other remedy before we get to that point. So this is a reason why we meet with them monthly to talk about how they're using this tool, if we see an opportunity to use it more or less, or how we're seeing that impact. So that's a big reason why we have those discussions. Yeah. So I don't see that changing. So far, we've seen it effective, but know that that is a tool to keep in mind.
Are there any discussions about changing it, or seeing that, perhaps driving it in one direction or the other could possibly benefit improving rentals, or improving living conditions, that kind of a thing?
We haven't had those discussions yet on reasons or needs of having to change it. I know they're very intentional in how this is enforced to ensure, crimes of victims, for example, aren't penalized. So they're very intentional with it. So it's certainly feedback we could consider, but I would say at this time we're finding it to be mostly effective where it needs to be.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Edens.
I believe Ms. Woodward had a comment on your last question. I'm not sure which one. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the data analysis. And as we continue to collect that data, we can use our GIS to be able to show and use that. But I think we need to collect it for about 2 years, which is really what Ms. Edens kind of plans to do, so that we can further analyze that. And I just also wanted to make one clarification that the building inspector wouldn't be within Housing and Neighborhood Services. It was within our building team. So out there doing inspection, so.
Got it. Okay. So thank you. That data would be neat, and I'd love to see it overlaid over that 30, 40, 50% AMI map, especially.
We could certainly do that.
Awesome. Thanks.
Sorry about the misspeak on the building inspector. I thought it was so clever that this presentation went into the budget where it said the additional inspector, because yeah, you're running lean. So thank you for all you do. Okay, Councilmember Palmer and then Councilmember Wall.
Well, to answer kind of Mr. Keene's question, I would say, if you have a bunch of new units for the last 9 years, that you're gonna have less inspections and less problems. You're seeing us going away from 2s and 4s and rentals to 20 and 30, 66 unit buildings that are managed. We now have an increase in management companies instead of just a person that decided to do this as an investment. So that helps out quite a bit. I'm gonna go back to my CIA, and it was for incentives for entry level homes, less than $240,000, not market rate. Market rate's about $350,000. HRA had a presentation that showed that $250,000 homes could be built in Rochester. And so it's not that hard to do. Again, at some point, we have a study that says we should be doing 450 single family dwellings. We're at 122. We're just way behind. We're at where we need to be for rentals, but we are not with single family homeowner occupied homes. And it's really frustrating to sit here and wait and wait and wait. So
I think we all agree. It's just want to have sound recommendations, so we're not making policy changes not on the fly, but on really without the information we need. So I agree with you. We need to invest smartly here. It's just also want to give staff the time while they're carrying this incredible load of other work as well. Councilmember Wall.
I certainly understand Councilmember Palmer's frustrations. And I can appreciate Mr. Keen's understanding that it's private development. But the same costs that are in Rochester are costs that would be true for Cottage Grove, Woodbury, Rosemount, where they're developing thousands of homes. What is it about Rochester that somehow we can't emulate what some of these growing suburbs? And I think that Rochester has even more to offer than a Rosemount or a Cottage Grove. Probably shouldn't say that. I'll get emails. I really love our city and would love us to be able to encourage development that will bring those single family homes to the 450 or whatever it is that would help us.
All right.
Just a point of clarification on Councilmember Kirkpatrick talked about, we put up a coalition chart there talking about the 30 to 50% AMI. Those were not city, those were coalition KPIs and not the city. And again, new housing starts is an issue across the Twin Cities, across a lot of places. It's not a unique problem to Rochester. The thing I'm worried about is the implication is it's because of city government. I mean, I think we have studied enough to try to say, should we get rid of all these things? Should the other taxpayers pay to build other people's houses? And we've been through that. So I don't think we want to go that way. I think there's a lot of market issues happening that are keeping housing starting from being where they want to be. I'm questioning or rejecting the implication that city government is the reason we're not building houses in Rochester.
This is definitely a shared community.
And that's not
challenge.
what was said.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page here. We need to take a good look at what the city can do differently, but that is one piece of a broader set of challenges in our community and in our country. So we will do what we can, and thank you so much for your leadership. All right. We're moving on to budget. Go ahead, Ms. Elms.
Maybe as Rachel's bringing up the budget slides, I would just say that all of the things that are on this last policy consideration slide are things that we would bring forward. There are financial implications to that. And the other thing that was mentioned that is going before the voters that will start in September 22nd for voting in person and by mail is a funding source that if approved, would have a significant impact that other communities that were mentioned wouldn't have available to them. So we're trying to do that in keeping with all of those other considerations, recognizing that there may be different financial implications if that funding source is available than what would happen if different rates, et cetera, needed to be adjusted in some of those utility funds in order to address the situation. So it's been loaded. Thank you, Rachel. We're back before you about budget again. We've had a couple of times together and gone in detail to some of the decision packages. And so today we wanted to just do a little bit of a look ahead through the budget calendar that runs through the end of the year, provide any additional information that you might need, and then also present some information on where we're sitting right now in phase one of the public safety one-time funding that had come from the legislature that we would expect to be able to bring to you somewhat separate from the budget since it's a separate funding source. So with that, I would just say we have a ways ahead of us from at least the perspective of teammates. A lot ends up happening. We'll continue to work with the county to determine if there's more information about the levy and how that's distributing across different tax categories as they have more time to provide us information. We're hoping that the final CIP will be loaded on September 29th in our budget modules, and that is key to being able to deliver the budget book soon after. I haven't had a lot of questions about the capital improvement program, which we introduced early in June this year. On October 2nd, you will be seeing the DMC capital improvement program coming before you as a city council. There's some briefing meetings also being scheduled for you to be able to ask some more detailed more detailed questions. We would expect the final, maybe we should have put final in here, final numbers from Rochester Public Utilities coming in mid-October. And then the first reading of the 2024 proposed fees. So if there's any changes to the fee schedule, that happens sort of after that preliminary levy approval coming forward on September 18th. And then any final presentations that might be necessary. If there's something new that's come up, I think we've answered most questions, but perhaps there's new ones we aren't aware of. And then we would be scheduled to have the public hearing for the final adoption of the budget in on December 4th. And then there's just a few things that we do in order to get the information to the county so that they can do their part in the assessor's office. Again, just wanted to note here that when we were showing some of the debt service, that's the 300 level accruals is what's showing in the debt service line here. So you'll see in 2023, 11 million, in 2024, 21.7 million, in 2025, 32.8 million. All of those other revenue related debt services, so revenue supported debt that's backed by GO, so water fund, wastewater fund, those types of things, those are showing up in operations. So there is debt service that is showing up in that operational account, primarily related to our enterprise funds. So everybody was right on the amount of debt service. It's just showing up slightly differently in this very high level roll up of the budget. We did have a question about the 6-year capital improvement program. Just wanted to remind folks there's still a very low amount of tax levy that is dedicated to that. So this is also shows up in the budget book, the very large flipping book that's about 1,000 pages available online. This just is to reaffirm that there is a small amount, $8.5 million of tax levy that is going forward. And then of course we have the 6-year projection where we show that increasing, but each year the city council adopts the supplemental budget. So there may be changes there. And you can see local government aid anticipated there. Although that's projected to be level based on the formula, I think unless we see changes at the legislative level, you might be seeing some declines in some of that local government aid that would be committed to the capital improvement program. But everything else is really transfers and then other funding that isn't property tax related funding, rolling up to about $153 million for the 2024 budget for capital improvement. This is just to let you know in a quick and clickable way. If you're in this presentation this morning, it wasn't clickable. You had to copy these and put them into your URL. Thank you, Council President, for letting us know that the clicking wasn't working. So if you were to select, for example, 2024 sources of funds, that's like a one-stop shopping of all of the different sources of funds, and it gives you a little bit of a representation. Oh, thank you. It's always good to have a magic assistant that makes it all work for you. So if you were to look at this, all of the ad valorem taxes that add up to the 101 million, you can see across the left-hand side of the page that the general fund is, of course, receiving the lion's share of that. So about $69 million. So you remember seeing this graphically. If you were to click into the flipping book, you'd be able to see this in one place where the major sources of funds are and how that's supporting our different resources across the operating funds. If you were to click, say, on the uses of funds, that one I think is also interesting. So this is the expenditure fund summary. You can see if you look at the entire, this is everything but Rochester Public Utilities. So rolled up $361.8 million, about 100 and, oh, I'm going to add this, 110.7 million of that is employee services. So when we talk about like a third of the budget is employees. So if we weren't looking at some of that, when we talk about the ability to reduce the budget, you'd be really looking at reducing services when we look at that. So it's just another way of looking at the budget in case you're interested over time. Just when you have shared probably some of the most important links to that in the budget document. So you can see that both for 2024 and 2025. And then going to the next slide. Oh, I actually have the clicker. Thanks. To do magic myself now. You can see some of those same things for the capital improvement program budget, the sources and uses of funds. The 6-year capital improvement program, you can see that, which I just showed you in this presentation. The decision packages for 2024 and 2025, both recommended and not recommended, but likely to come to you in the future, some of them, as well as the 6-year forecast. So that kind of gives you an idea of how we see the trends coming and what we would need to be planning for from a policy perspective if the city council wanted to see that trend change. And then, of course, the Rochester Public Utilities recommended operating budget sits separately in the actual budget document, although we have that rolled up in a couple of different places for you in some of these presentations. So I did want to just touch on this slide that we talked about last time in a little bit more of a functional way than I did last time. Items in need of resolution. So I mentioned a couple of these. The Destination Medical Center Capital Improvement Program is anticipated to come to you on October 2nd. That is something that doesn't impact the tax levy. The RPU, other than as development happens, likely there'd be new construction that would pick up its value in some of the tax levy. But as far as establishing a tax levy, doesn't impact that. Rochester Public Utility payment in lieu of taxes amounts, again, we're expecting a little bit more payment in lieu of taxes coming from Rochester Public Utilities, but we also have a number of unknowns ahead of us with some of the legislative changes that impact our employment services. And those we're still kind of muddling through how that might impact us. And we don't have the final RPU budget yet, final. We have mostly final, but not final. And then we have just built in a couple of different things. So that earned safe and sick time, again, we don't know the full impact of that, but that will apply to quite a number of employees and may have some significant impacts to overtime for areas where we need to backfill. The final approach to the park maintenance facility, that's related to the city's portion of the bonding. So we still have some time for that. But what we did project in your 6-year forecast is fully funding the city's funded portion from tax levy. And so you had seen a slide earlier on that suggests there's also some options available to you that would reduce that. So that would be if there are different decisions made by the council, then you would be seeing less impact on the tax levy than what's projected here in future years. Vehicle maintenance, this is just something that we need to continue to talk about. We will have made some progress in this budget to better fund the vehicle maintenance and some policy decisions to sort of slowly ramp up the anticipated cost of vehicles since they really ramped up on us over the last 2 years, especially on that heavy equipment. So I just think that'll be important to continue to have as a conversation. It's not something we're going to fully solve for in 1 year unless you have real big eyes and are ready to gulp. So those are just things just to know they're on the radar. But those are things that I don't know that you really need to solve for by the end of the year. We're making progress. And those are just things to keep in mind also for 2025. And then adjusting for impacts of that legislative session, as I mentioned, there's a little bit of capacity that we built into the 2025 budget because we will certainly know more by then about how we're actually faring with rolling out some of the policy changes that we'll be subject to, as well as others in the community. But we did have some positive. We had a lot of positive in the last session. And one of those things is some public safety aid one-time funding. And so we thought it might be a good opportunity for the city council to sort of digest the strategy for this, which is sort of a phased approach where there would be some initial funding, including an operating review, and that could inform future investments of the phase 2 funding. Again, this is one-time funding. So one of the concerns that we wanted to keep in mind is not obligating the city council to future commitments, but recognizing that if we're successful at some of these things, that it might be important to be considering how you would build in, for example, the first item, if alternative police response to some of the people experiencing homelessness challenges is successful, we would want to be able to bring back to council something in that supplemental budget to be able to say, we think this is important for you to adjust where we had projected 2025 and move that forward. But the vast majority of these other sources, as you can see, are really one-time funding with technology, a one-time kind of bump in training, for both the police and fire department, and then getting ahead of some of the vehicle replacement, which I mentioned before, that is currently unfunded both for police and fire. And then setting aside again for that public safety evaluation, just making sure, validating the strategic planning that the fire department has done and making sure that if that comes back and validates it, which I believe it will, also, if it tells us anything else, like also you need to be prepared for X, Y, or Z in 10 or 15 or 20 years. I just think it feels like the city council responded well to kind of having something laid out to understand what you might need to overcome in order to influence outcomes in the community, as well as we are still seeing some backlogs and challenges with the backlogs that had occurred during the pandemic with the amount of caseload that our city attorney's office is experiencing. So we do have a little bit more detail. I just wanted to check and see whether there are any police teammates on, or I will just continue to go through the slides that they provided. This is just a little bit more detail about the pilot project that they are looking to have that proof of concept. And as we had talked it through, I think a good corollary would be to think of this similarly to the funding of the fourth mental health community response person for the county. They also have they're already for mental health, the drug and alcohol addiction related response. And so thinking of how we might respond in that way, this would be as we're moving through the program, as we get concerns about people experiencing homelessness in public places, is there a better way to continue to respond before we get into a situation where there might be an enforcement action with the police? Then looking at the camera infrastructure, I think you're aware that we have some significant camera infrastructure installed throughout the community in a number of different public spaces that helps our PD be able to understand what's occurring in that space and be able to stay ahead of things, or if something does occur, be able to use that in some of their investigative practices. Here's a bit of a breakdown of that $300,000 number for police for training programs, and this would be in coordination with Cham Watella, our DEI director, assuring that it sort of aligns with some of the other goals that the rest of the organization is moving through, but also recognizing there may be something slightly different for policing. So leadership training, use of force training, and cultural competency, and getting through all of their folks on a pretty short basis.
Ms. Elms?
Yep.
Are those based on estimates from a consultant?
These are very round numbers. So let's say this came in in total like $220,000. You have to also remember that this likely includes some of the overtime that's associated with this. Okay. So when we have people that are in shift type roles and are bringing them all into a type of training, this would be true also for fire department teammates. It's challenging to get them in like a daytime scenario because they work multiple shifts that are not in the daytime or during weekdays. So this would absorb both the cost of the training and I believe also offset some of the additional costs that you might see in overtime, training
Okay,
overtime.
so 2 quick follow-ups. So just remembering this is a $35 million department, so seems like a big number, but it's for a large part of our staff. So that's one. And then the other is the money would just go back into the pot for phase 2 if they did underspend?
Correct. So let's just say they had a contract for a random number, $68,000 for one of these training components. That would come forward to the city council and kind of reconcile against what was kind of estimated in the projection. Okay. So they would still need to come forward for approvals according to the purchasing policy, but this is just sort of attempting to outline some of the initial goals that they would have. Makes sense. And then, I don't know why I'm clicking on my own screen as well. We don't have anything to explain a fire truck and to explain the DEI training for fire, but it would be similar and very focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and trying to do that on a schedule right now based on how some of our cultural humility training is working to get into the fire schedule would take, I think, something like 10 years to get across the entire organization to be able to meet their minimum staffing for calls for service, et cetera. So it's really to emulate some of that. And I believe they intend to work, and they actually kind of have a rough quote with one of the professionals that was part of the citywide cohort, who actually is a former fire captain.
Oh, fabulous. Mr. Palmer had a comment, question?
Oh, keep going.
Oh, all right. I think that might have been the.
Oh, this is sort of this is generally what you'll see on September 18th, excuse me.
So I do have a question. I know where you are with slides. I was looking for the slide for public safety evaluation and city attorney emergency management. That's $500,000. Is there a slide on what that means?
I could either elaborate on that or Mr. Parrish could, but a public safety evaluation really looks at calls for all of your calls for service and measures you against yourself to determine where are your peak call loads. It's a more robust version of what the fire department did, but both for police and fire to understand what your turnout time is. For example, for fire, where are you seeing let's say it's taking you 4 minutes to get to a call, where are those minutes adding up within your deployment time? For police, it also looks at the different calls for service and how much available time there is if there was going to be a self-initiated call. If, police officers around town seeing something versus they're busy because they're actually actively working a call for service that came through the 911 dispatch.
So
center.
they're going to do this within themselves?
No, you would be issuing an RFP and getting response from consultants that would come in and have data and analysts that would comb through all of our calls for service and be looking at the deployment models that we have and determining, for example, also where you might be able to civilianize a position and be able to centralize work and work on doing the operation in a way that might be more optimal, that would potentially mitigate your costs over time, but also show you where your greatest points of
invest.
risk are in order where you need to see investment based on those calls for service and how much
And did
available.
this
time
come
you
from the
have.
police department?
We talked it through with police and fire department.
So I'm not in favor of doing a survey or having somebody come in and tell us, because I've not heard complaints about the fire or the police department or the fire department. And so I wouldn't be in favor of that. I have had complaints that we can't keep restrooms open in the parks. And I would think that if we could get our CSO officers as a pilot program for $200,000 to get them in the parks and see if we can't do something different. We do it for our parking lots or ramps. So I personally don't think that this is a good $200,000 to spend for public safety. And what is the city attorney and emergency management one?
Well, maybe the city attorney could speak to that, but we have some significant backlogs in the case files that are coming through based on cases that weren't heard during the pandemic when court was not operating at its most optimal level.
So are they getting 100,000? Are they getting 300,000? What's emergency management getting out of this line?
So it's proposed to be 50-50 split, and obviously public safety is very comprehensive. These are relatively small amounts in the scheme of the 5 million that we're looking to allocate, but definitely wanted to provide some opportunity in that space, particularly in, Mr. Spindler Craig can talk about, the significant prosecution sort of work and backlog that's happening. Maybe just another piece of context though, for the evaluation. I mean, you don't have to have a problem to want to do an evaluation. I mean, I think Council President indicated, this is 57% of the general fund budget that we spend on public safety. You don't talk about it a lot. And I think it's one of those things where, just to ensure that you're making wise and strategic investments and then looking forward on those types of investments. I also think at the staff level, we get requests sort of on an ad hoc basis. I need staffing over here, I need staffing over there. This, I think, really then provides you the opportunity to prioritize and systematize, but it creates a venue for you as a council and policymakers to have a conversation about what do you want to see out of your future public safety services? What are the things that you want to do now that you don't want to do? We got a request for 2 traffic officers this year. Probably a good idea, but is it restrooms or is it traffic officers? So I think it's one of those things. It gives you a lens in which to have some of these future conversations and then plan and prioritize, instead of really think about, what is it this particular budget cycle we're going to focus on. So that's the value, and it sort of leans into our data and evidence-based decision-making, some of the evaluation work that we've been doing in that space
And
as well.
high-performing organization. And I think just facing the workforce challenges we are in public safety and policing, that being really thoughtful about how we're going to staff the future public safety needs of our community is critical. I know obviously our fire department is starting to make those transitions and we're investing initially in the phase one of their work. So I think it's a really smart idea. It's not any criticism of our police department. It's just a thoughtful look at where we need to invest and how we support and sustain a police department in this community as we grow and change.
I guess I disagree, and the reason I'm bringing it up is that for me, I don't get complaints about the police department. I don't get wanting to take officers away and make them private. I do hear all the time about bathrooms and ramps and downtown, and if we could add more CSOs as a pilot to see if that takes care of these problems. The city attorney being behind is one thing, but I would think the state would help you out with that and emergency management. I have no clue what we're talking about. So for $500,000, I'd rather keep it, because this is a grant. This is a one-time funding from the state. This isn't oh geez, let's go fishing for some problem. So I would
Maybe I can
definitely not
clarify.
be,
Ms.
I'd
Elms, go
definitely not
ahead.
before this.
But I would encourage you to sit in sometime on an Olmsted County Justice Commission meeting to really hear the scale of the challenges that our county attorney and our city attorney's office are facing as part of our system in responding to.
But that's a court thing, and that is the state of Minnesota's
It's
responsibility to fund.
all
No,
connected together and
no,
it is
it's-
not
it's-
being funded by the state right
It
now.
is being funded by the state. The court system is funded by the state. It's not funded by the city of Rochester. We have our funding for our city attorney for our issues that are
Part of
misdemeanors
the
and
system
smaller.
that gets to the court system that is all backlogged.
You're not convincing me, and I
Okay,
think that, I
well,
think
we have a
putting,
wonderful city attorney who can explain more. Go ahead.
well, we have $500,000 sitting here in this budget that had no line item. Coming into this meeting, I read about alternatives, I read about training. I hadn't read anything about this. And so for me, I'll go back to the Maxwell study. If we're not gonna follow the Maxwell study, why would we follow some study we spend $200,000 on for the police department? And if you're gonna do a study for the police department, what are you trying to fix? I don't know what you're trying to fix.
Madam President, I
Mr.
can
Spindler Craig, go ahead.
just try to briefly address the portion that relates to my department, just to give a bit of additional context. Appreciate the question. Welcome it. There's a little bit of context to the staffing that has existed historically with my office. Just bear in mind that I think it's been a decade plus since we've added any staffing to my department, and we tried to be very thoughtful and intentional as we moved through the pandemic. We existed with a number of vacant positions for a period of time, and that made sense in part because of the slowdown within the court system during that time. We just ran extremely lean for a period of time. We had 2 prosecutors working the court system for a period of time during the pandemic. And not complaining about that, just giving context to, we went through a period of time where things were slower there and we were really lean. And frankly, we saved the city a lot of money during that period of time. We're now at a point where things have been getting more ramped up. I know it seems like everything else has moved on and a lot of other folks have moved on, but the court system is still catching up. And we're just extremely busy continuing to work through that backlog. We're not asking for permanent staff, and we don't think that that's the appropriate ask at this time. But that is part of the equation that we're working with here, is we're hoping that whether it's a 1-year period of time or so, some ability to supplement our staff, which we've tried to do through filling positions and bolstering our workforce without long-term commitment for the city. This funding seems to fit that kind of scenario, both with our criminal prosecutors who are in court, as well as with our victim liaison staff. They've been doing extremely good and important work. And I mention them in part because of some new obligations that are coming through from recent legislation related to safe and sick leave that takes effect in January. There are some additional obligations that likely fall on that staff going forward. Again, hoping to manage that additional workload through our long-term existing positions. But in the meantime, it will be there and we'll need to reevaluate that longer term. Again, appreciate the questions. Happy to talk more about the staffing and where this funding may fit and supplement those needs.
Thanks for that explanation. I know your team has been just working very hard and overtime, and I think it's nice to see some hopeful relief in the future. Councilmember Kirkpatrick, did you have a comment, question?
I think it was answered. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Keen?
Yeah, just to follow up, I did look at this and at high level there, you've got this public safety aid recommendations and you've got police, fire, and then legal and emergency management. And it seemed to break out okay. I agree with Councilmember Palmer that a level of detail that we saw in this makes it hard to, sit here and sort of approve it. The one thing I would say that I do worry about with funding like this is that we have to really focus on that one time versus starting programs that need to be funded after that. This is what we get in trouble with when we come up to a budget and we say, we're not going to do anything new, but we've already approved these other things before. I would have liked to see more funding into the unfunded replacement vehicles of this at this point, because I think it's a risk to law enforcement in the coming years that we're not funding this correctly. It may end up being just a different, it may not be a risk to law enforcement. It might be just a big hit to our taxpayers that'll have to pay for more of these vehicles. But those are the kinds of one-time things that I would like to see us have a kind of an emphasis on. The training is probably good, but again, training to me seems it should come out of an operational budget unless there's a really good definition that no, this is one time. When I read things like leadership training and that, I don't feel that's one time. But again, I look at this as the high level packets of having police, fire, emergency management, and the attorney's office. Those are the public safety categories that I would like to see addressed, and spending half of it in the first year seems to make sense.
Right, other thoughts? Councilmember Kirkpatrick?
Has the idea been looked at, or is it not possible to, for instance, with the fire department, instead of hiring consultants to kind of look at data, could we purchase some kind of a software program that would be put with dispatch or on computers that can monitor and log all of this ongoing, so it wouldn't be just a one-time type of a consultancy? It would be tracking over time and could adjust efficiencies and effectiveness as we hit new, I don't know, economic trends, or I don't know, equipment trends or purchasing, something like that. Is that even possible? Does something like that even exist?
So maybe I could start with that. And then I know that we do have teammates from fire here. I'm not getting any feedback that police is online. So the intent of this and how I've seen this work, and just to clarify, this isn't to say there's something wrong with police or something wrong with fire. It's to identify what is your future scope of work and needs so that you can lay out. I believe what it's going to tell you is that you're going to need to make continuous future investments in both, which is similar to what came forward from the fire department, which is used a piece of this type of analysis, but doesn't take into account all of the other analysis. All of this data is data that we already have that would come from the National Fire Institute data that we track in our reporting system and in the calls for service system, and other data that is in the police department. But there are data and metrics and different companies that come in and do this. You could continue to utilize their analysis process in the future to determine, are there certain things that you want to continue to track because they rose to being so important that that's going to be your key indicators when you need to really be thinking about making future decisions on investments. They typically, they give you feedback and guidelines. They don't say you have to do this or your police or fire department is bad. They indicate that based on your call volumes, your call for service, how your heat maps are looking, and all of the different information, that this is where you might want to be investing, or these might be opportunities for how you could shift before you add significant future investment, and lay out hopefully some groundwork that says this is sort of your 5 to 10 to 20-year financial plan that you need to be thinking about when you're thinking about how much it's going to take in order to provide appropriate public safety services to a 55 square mile community that has a lot of different demographics and challenges faced by both the fire department and the police department.
Thanks for that. Mayor Norton?
Yeah, I also want to mention, we are looking at
and I don't know if we'll go with it or not, but we are exploring some data collection tools that will help us perhaps not have to have a $200,000 public safety evaluation, because we will have the data. And what will help then is for people to say, what is it on this board? The administrator mentioned, we want to measure things and we want to know how we're doing, but we need to know what we're going to measure. And so hopefully we'll be going out for an RFP for this process. And if there are certain things that members of the city council are looking that you want to know, how do we compare to another department our size, or I want to know more about this issue. A lot of it with a good data collection system can be answered by looking at a screen once you have the data. It doesn't mean you have to have necessarily an evaluation unless you're benchmarking. And we've done some benchmarking in the past, but we don't have as robust a tool as I think we need in a community our size. And so I met with one firm, and the chief has a meeting set up with that firm as well. And if it looks like something that's useful, maybe we'll hear more. I just asked him to take a peek and see if that sort of tool would be helpful. But I think also we need to think about what is it we want to look for? What is the concern you may have? What area do you want to know information about? Because what are we measuring? And so if there's something that you're looking for, you need to let us know what you're looking for, what kind of information would be helpful to you, so we can make sure we include that in an RFP. And I would just, let me just take one more deep breath. I will just say, I share some of Councilmember Palmer's concerns about this, and I've talked to the administrator about it, and I think there can be good information gleaned. But I also think there's an issue in a city that has a mayor who is supposed to oversee police, who has nothing to do with any budget discussions or is included in any of them. It's a very difficult position for me to be in and to respond to the community when I'm not included in the budget discussions. And so I just, I suggested that before. Maybe it should be a little bit bigger group that digs into this, including the mayor, when it's, supposedly my purview to oversee police. And I know it's awkward because there's police, fire, attorneys, and EMS all included in this, but in this particular portion, it would have been nice to be included in the discussion up front, and hopefully we'll do better moving on.
Thanks for that feedback. All right. Was there a final comment, question? Otherwise, we will wrap this up. This will actually come forward to us.
Yeah, we're not expecting you to make a decision today.
Yeah.
We just wanted to introduce the concept.
Yeah, it was helpful to hear some of my colleagues' concerns, but I do encourage you to attend an OCJC meeting sometime, because it's really informative to think about how all these partners work together and how we are trying to think about a future where data is aligned across departments, so we can collect it as a system and look at how we're doing, and not just one department who collects data differently than our other departments or agencies. So really interesting work going on. All right, well, we just have one more item. Ms. Zelms, do you want to start us on the MetroNet, or Mr. Spindler-Craig?
Either of us can. This is a pretty high level item. I don't know if we have our presenter here as well. We have an outside attorney, but essentially this is the MetroNet cable franchise, and they have approached the city with some interest in ending their cable franchise. So I don't know if Mr. Spindler-Craig has more to add before Mr. Groban speaks.
Thank you, Madam President. I think we do just need to make sure that our outside counsel is connected on this. I've been trying to keep him apprised of our progress here.
Sounds like he needs a Zoom link as a presenter. I thought we'd sent that earlier.
Madam President, I know we don't normally take breaks during study session, but if you care to take a 3-minute break, I'll just connect with.
Sure, we'll meet back here
connect with him by phone.
at 5.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Testing 1, 2. Can anyone hear me?
And how many are multiple? Actually, I think they, so, like, now, based
Yeah,
on.
that's another point.
Yeah, how many have multiple?
No, I understand.
Like, we have.
That's not.
Together for years now. That's how we think that's the case.
I was hoping when something.
That's when that started.
Yeah. But that's what it's saying.
Checking in. Can anybody hear me?
Recording in progress.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I will turn it over to our attorney, Mr. Spindler Craig, to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, council members, mayor, appreciate your patience on that. Just was able to connect with Mr. Grogan. I won't steal his thunder, but briefly, the matters, the materials that are before you are somewhat self-explanatory. Wanted to have an opportunity to update the council on this matter related to the MetroNet cable franchise agreement. Mr. Grogan is with Moss and Barnett out of Minneapolis, has assisted the city in the past as a specialty in this particular area. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Grogan.
Thank you very much. Can we just verify that you guys can hear me okay?
Yes, you're
Okay,
a little bit
thank you.
quiet. I'm wondering if we can adjust his volume.
I will try to turn mine up as well. How is that?
Yep, we can hear you. Thank you.
Very good. Members of the council, again, for the record, my name is Brian Grogan. I'm an attorney with the Minneapolis law firm of Moss and Barnett. I've actually been working with the city now for over 20 years on various communications law issues, episodically as they come up for renewal or as issues may arise. The issue before the council right now relates to the MetroNet cable franchise. If we can flip the slide for a moment to the first one, there we go. So the city has long been served by a company called Charter Communications, which now goes by the name Spectrum. And that has been the incumbent operator for several decades in the city. And in 2018, MetroNet, a new company, came to the city seeking a competitive cable franchise. And back at the time, the theory was they would provide telephone, cable, and broadband, and they would compete head to head with Charter. So at that time, I worked with the city and we adopted a franchise that very much was comparable to what Charter had as a cable franchise from the city of Rochester. And in that way, both operators would compete using the same basic document. We would let them fight it out in the marketplace, and the constituents in the city of Rochester would be able to pick and choose who they wanted to buy service from. As time has gone on now on this franchise, it was a 5-year term. What Metronet has found is that more and more of their prospective customers aren't buying cable TV. They're more interested in broadband service. And Spectrum is finding some of the similar things, although not maybe to the same degree as Metronet. Just the whole advent of over-the-top streaming services, what people really are seeking is high-speed broadband. So the Metronet franchise expires in the spring of next year, the spring of 24. And what Metronet has done is come to the city and said, we would like to stop providing cable service sooner than that. We'd like to basically terminate our cable franchise, but they still want to provide broadband service in the community and allow residents to pick and choose which broadband company they want to purchase their services from. So if we turn to the next slide, what we have done is consider that option. And by the way, as an overlay, we're also simultaneously trying to renew Spectrum's cable franchise. So we're in the process of going through a renewal with Charter or Spectrum. And we don't have a problem necessarily from a staff perspective allowing a company that doesn't want to be in the cable business to get out of that business. But what we want to do is make sure that we don't have any loose ends related to that prior franchise agreement. And so I've listed here on this slide several things that the city would like to accomplish at the staff level to allow for the termination of this franchise before its normal expiration. We want everything removed from the city's streets that isn't necessary for the provision of cable service. It's likely that there would be very little, that most of it would still be used for the provision of broadband, but it's possible that some of the things that might be in the streets or above ground pedestals would not be needed for a pure broadband provision of service. We'd also like the long-term maintenance of insurance policies and various financial security that the city benefits from under the cable franchise to continue for a period of time, so that we're not basically in a position where the contract ends and now we're short on our security in case an event may have occurred under the existing cable franchise that we're not aware of at this time. We'd also like the company to provide us with maps of where their facilities are, which is something that's also included in a pole attachment agreement that Metronet has with Rochester Public Utilities. We want a commitment that they'll comply with the city code and with various permit obligations, and that they'll resolve any outstanding issues that may exist under the pole attachment agreement that allows them to string their wires on various RPU poles around the city. And then finally, we'd like them to pay for whatever costs and expenses the city may incur out of pocket to try to resolve this contractual issue. From Metronet's perspective, what they would gain is the ability to terminate the cable service, migrate those customers probably to an over-the-top provider, and focus on the core business that they want to provide, which is broadband service. They'd like to get out of the additional cost it takes to maintain a cable system with very few cable subscribers in the city. So that agreement, I believe, is before you. It's a draft settlement agreement. We had prepared that at the staff level, and we have submitted that to Metronet. We're waiting for them to review and respond back to us. I think the purpose of today's briefing is to make sure that we didn't miss anything that the council may be focused on. And then ideally, we'll reach agreement with Metronet on the terms of that settlement agreement, and then bring this back to you for final consideration, knowing that we have agreement from Metronet. And with that, I'll pause and take any quick questions that the council may have.
Madam President, if I may just add just one bit of additional context. We have been working very closely with RPU over time, including on this particular topic. All of these conversations, both with respect to cable and broadband, of course, are very relevant to RPU day to day. They've been dealing, frankly, with many of those challenges with the build out by MetroNet. So we're working closely with them, and you see through some of the materials before you that many of the what we're trying to accomplish through this negotiation is focused on the concerns by RPU.
Thank you for helping us read between the lines. Mr. Palmer, then Ms. Kirkpatrick.
Kind of a simple question. If we had an internet company wanting to come into Rochester, would we have to allow them to come into Rochester and use our right of ways?
The short answer is yes. Almost all of the companies these days that are coming into the Minnesota, and there's a lot of them, because there is an increased volume of state and federal broadband funding that's now available to help finance the infrastructure of these systems. They would come in and they would have authority through the Public Utilities Commission, what's known as a certificate of need and convenience, that would allow them to provide telecommunications service. And once they have that authority, they would not need a franchise or other authorization from the city. They would simply be subject to the city code requirements for build out and permitting.
So, but isn't all that grant for outstate, not for communities like Rochester, which are dense?
Well, what we've seen is a number of communities with multiple providers coming. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I say that the city of Bloomington has nearly 5 different providers knocking on the door seeking to provide broadband service in competition with Comcast. So it's whether they have the benefit of state or federal funding, I can't speak to that issue, but I do know that many communities, of significant size are still seeing competitors come seeking authority to provide services.
And we can't make them remove their equipment out of our right of way.
Not to the extent it's being used for an otherwise authorized service. And in this case, MetroNet does have authority under the Public Utilities Commission to provide what they call competitive local exchange services. So they have the legal authority to be in the right of way, subject to compliance with the city code. What they would not need to go forward then and provide broadband and telephone service would be any franchising authority from the city.
Thank you.
Councilmember Kirkpatrick.
Thank you. So my question was more related to the end of yours, Mr. Palmer, about the equipment, supplies, or materials that are left in our existing infrastructure, about removing that. I believe when you introduced this topic to us, you had mentioned something to the effect of asking them to remove it. It was a part of this agreement, but how would we enforce that if they just simply refuse? Can you kind of clarify what you were talking about there?
Well, absolutely, and it's a good question. The issue here is when a company comes in, all the facilities that companies put in these days, they're basically over a single black wire, whether it's fiber or coax or twisted pair. There's a single wire that will go to a particular resident's home. Whether any ancillary equipment is needed to provide video service as opposed to broadband service, that's the distinction we're trying to make in the settlement agreement. And we're expressly stating that if there is any equipment located in the city's rights of way that is there only for the sole purpose of providing cable television service, we want that removed. Now, the answer may very well be, this is all data-driven information. It's all IP delivered, and it's all streams of data, and there is no functional difference between whether we're providing broadband service or cable video service. So there isn't anything to be removed, but that's going to be specific to each system. So we've made a broad statement, and the reason we've put this into a settlement agreement is so that we have a written contract. Once the franchise is gone, it's either expired or it's terminated, and it's a moot contract. By having an ongoing settlement agreement, we now have a written statement from the company that says they will not maintain items in your right of way that are no longer needed because they're not providing the video services any longer. But again, I want to clarify, it's not crystal clear that that would result in a meaningful elimination of any equipment from your right of way. It may very well be that everything they've installed is also simultaneously being used for broadband services, in which case they're not going to be required to remove it because they have authority from the Public Utilities Commission to keep it there.
Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And again, I think I'm just trying to think this through with analogies. And I think internet companies are similar to delivery companies that can come in and use our roads to deliver to individual houses. They don't need a special permit from the city to use our streets. So again, as they get into internet only, that's kind of how I'm looking at this. I'm not sure if that's helpful or is going to get me in more trouble. But in this case, since Metronet is newer, they've got to have the bulk of their customers wanted them for, as you say, internet access and not for cable TV. So they have a very small number and a very small use of the franchise. But when they were building out, we ran into a lot of trouble. I have memories of like stopping their progress because they were drilling through things in the right of way that were troublesome. I'm assuming that's all been resolved and we're not having any more troubles like that with any sort of build out or even service setups. I'll say that's a question to staff here or to the legal department.
I guess I could take a stab. I don't know that it's all resolved. It sometimes depends on the person that's doing the drilling. I have an extra hole in my house. But I do think there's probably just important to note that they would still have to meet all of the city permit obligations, which in some ways is more onerous without a franchise than with a franchise, because they will have to get a permit for every internet drop that touches the right of way, which they don't have to do with a cable franchise.
Yeah. Again, that gave them more blanket authority where they won't have that anymore. But I think they're already built out. The other question, as far as more city than it is legal, but we also during the build out gave them access to things like Skyway and that are not generally considered right of way. Is there anything there that needs to stay or needs to change or anything with those special accesses we were given to Metronet?
I can certainly try to answer that, and I'm happy to have staff chime in. To the extent the city authorized, whether through a building permit or through the city code construction process, authorized a company to go onto property that wouldn't otherwise be available as in a utility easement. There's nothing in this settlement agreement that takes away the authority of that company to maintain those facilities. And frankly, in most cases, we probably wouldn't want to disrupt what is already in place simply because it would be more of a problem in terms of disrupting a buried facility or an existing facility and having to clean up the elimination of it than to simply leave that there. Here, I think the other issue is we would likely want the company to continue to provide robust broadband service so that we have multiple choices for businesses and residential customers to make their choice as to who they want to buy that service from. The only issues that we've addressed in the settlement agreement relate to the pole attachment agreement specifically. By the way, that document will continue forward between Metronet and RPU, but we'd like to use this as an opportunity to clean up any disagreements about the compliance with that agreement as part of a global settlement with this, moving away from the cable service provision.
Okay, and it might be a good time to point out when you talk about the pole agreements, the poles are not considered part of the right of way. The poles are RPU property, and I believe there are rents being paid to use those poles. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Yes, Councilmember.
Okay. Yeah, again, I appreciate the direction you're trying to take us here. These are, again, we don't have this big build out, this idea of having a closeout agreement puts us in better condition than just letting it run out. At the same time, this does make me fearful of, again, I think when you're talking about the low number of cable customers Metronet has, I would assume they're going to have the impact of not being able to have cable on their internet service anymore when this goes into place. I worry if we go down the similar path with Charter/Spectrum.
I actually share that concern. Today there was kind of a significant national event that happened between Charter and Disney. You may have read about it last week. Those two had a very public disconnect between an ongoing carriage agreement where all of the ESPN and other Disney programming was pulled off of Charter for nearly 15 million subscribers around the country. And just today, they finally announced that they did get a deal done and that programming is immediately back in place. But that's a sign of the times that we are in, where we're seeing an evolution in terms of how people consume video content, whether it's on their phone, on their tablet, computer, or TV. And these companies are struggling trying to figure out how to deal with the carriage, how to price it, and whether the traditional way of delivering it still is viable or whether it has to be rethought through. And so it's a long-winded way, council member, of saying I agree with your concern. I don't think this will be the last time you'll be grappling with questions about how cable TV is going to be delivered and how it impacts the use of your streets.
And again, like everyone, I want to see the markets work this out and let them do this. But I consider there's a major age differentiation thing happening here, where a lot of our older residents will lose their cable, and this idea of being able to go to these other services might be a bridge too far without some major changes. So those are some of my worries as I go through this. But at the Charter level, I'm sorry, at the Metronet level, I think those are manageable. Thanks.
Councilmember Palmer, then Wall.
Quick question, two of them. Really all we're deciding is if they want to let this run out, franchise run out, they can let it run out and there's really not much we can do. Is that correct?
That is. We have some, I think, disagreement between the city and Metronet about compliance with the franchise, and are they in fact fully delivering the cable service. We would prefer to simply sidestep that issue and deal with it via this settlement agreement, but I don't disagree with your characterization.
And then the other question is, if I understand this, remember this correctly, is that under the cable, they had to cable everybody in the city of Rochester, not just cherry pick neighborhoods. In the internet world, they can cherry pick what they want. Is that correct?
Well, without picking on any company, the only reason that any company in Minnesota has to have a specific build-out obligation is because it would be in a local franchise, which is something that the League of Minnesota Cities has continually talked at the legislature about, that there are benefits from these franchise documents because it basically got ubiquitous build-out for cable TV, and then serendipity, it occurred that everybody had broadband coverage because it was using the same system. Had that not been required, there would not probably have been universal build out. So the short answer to your question is yes, without a franchise, any company that comes into any community can build where it believes it has a good business case, and there would be no contractual obligation at the local or state level for them to build to places that they don't want to.
Thank you.
And just a point of clarification, I believe the Metronet deal was to build out to 80%. Now, it wasn't 100%. There's a lot of there's a lot of areas they did not go into for specific business reasons.
All right, Councilmember Wall.
With only a little more than 6 months left in the agreement, what's the impetus for spending the kind of time and money on legal opinions from both sides and the cost of just this settlement?
Well, I think the hope would be to get it done as soon as possible. The cost of, as you get deeper into the fall here, the cost of renegotiating all of the program carriage agreements, the local broadcaster agreements, the receive equipment to install, to maintain that, to have it show up on the system. Rochester's lineup won't be the same as other Metronet systems because it has its own set of broadcast requirements there. All of that builds layers of cost. And the sooner that can be resolved by the company, the sooner they can move on to focus on the business that they're focused on, which is more broadband delivery. So there's a motivation from their side. And from the city side, I think we've probably covered why we believe it would be a good idea for us to enter into this kind of an agreement.
All right, thank you for that response. Any final questions, concerns? Councilmember Kirkpatrick?
The phrase caveat emptor keeps entering my mind, buyer beware. Is Metronet going to have anything over us, so to speak, with that in mind? Just wondering if this will really be as clean as we think it could be and will be. And
well, there has been sure, yeah. So it's a very good question. That this type of an agreement has been used before, because this is not the first time in Minnesota that we've had a company change its plans for the delivery of video services. CenturyLink, several years back, obtained franchises in nearly 80 different jurisdictions throughout the Twin Cities. And then through some acquisitions and mergers, CenturyLink modified their plans and decided they didn't want to be in the video business any longer. And they wanted to get out of some of their franchises. So this path has been followed in many different jurisdictions to try to resolve the issue. So it has worked effectively, at least in those relationships between CenturyLink and many of the Twin Cities metro area communities. And so the expectation would be, following that same formula, that it will work effectively here in Rochester and with Metronet as well. But those concerns that you raise are always concerns when you're talking about long-term contractual relationships. They require two parties that both want to see the agreement fulfilled. Right now, I have no reason to doubt that from either side, so I expect this will be effective. But it's always a cautionary tale. You always have to keep that in mind.
thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Mr. Grogan, for joining us and for the advice to the city. Mr. Spindler-Craig, any final wrap-up comments?
Just on that last question, I would just agree with the point taken. We are trying to make this as clean and efficient and as least costly as possible, and appreciate Mr. Grogan's assistance to that end. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll turn it over to Ms. Zelms for a study session outlook.
Thank you, Council President, Council Members, Mayor Norton. On the 18th of September, you will have that sustainability update that was mentioned at the last council meeting. We'll make sure to include some information on the different efforts that are underway for the infrastructure, whatever IRA stands for, Inflation Reduction Act. I always think it's infrastructure because it's mostly infrastructure. And then on the second, we have the overview of co-design that came up in a prior meeting, and then just wanted to recognize that the 25th of September, we don't have meetings. That's Yom Kippur. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Good discussions, and we'll see you next week.